Hello, I'm Dr. Ron England coming to you from Daytona State College, and this is Human-Computer Interaction, CEN3722. And today we're going to talk about ergonomics, and this is just a continuation of our discussion on human factors. What we are going to do, and the reason we're looking at ergonomics in a little bit more depth is there's some things about ergonomics that I did want to get into its own lecture so that you understood a little bit more about how ergonomics is a specific field within human factors, but also some of the things that you really got to take into consideration when you're dealing with ergonomics, because ergonomics is one of those things that can get you into a lot of trouble, but it's also a very important field within the field of human factors. Not as much within the design of user interfaces, but within the full field of human factors itself. So we're going to look at what is ergonomics and some of the things that can actually happen in bad ergonomics, and also what adverse effects do you get and how can you deal with those adverse effects. And actually not just how do you deal with those adverse effects, but what do you have to do to deal with the potential adverse effects of poor ergonomics. First, ergonomics. And ergonomics is very, very simple. Fit the person to the job or fit the job to the person, essentially making sure that you've got a safe, comfortable, and usable workplace environment. You need to understand the risk factors in the workplace that are part of the design of the process and tasks that you have users do. And this applies whether it's something where you're working with hard, heavy equipment, or something where people are moving around with different types of machines, or working on a computer in an office type environment. All of these have ergonomic dangers. So what are those risk factors? Well, some of them are kind of obvious. When you're dealing with heavy equipment or dealing with moving and lifting heavy loads, you've got some issues that you can potentially have, especially if it requires bending or moving or specific motions that are a little bit more extreme than a standard range of motion. Any type of repetitive task has the potential of being a problem with the ergonomics itself, and ensuring that your users actually have correct, comfortable, and ergonomically designed and known ergonomic designs for body position. What are some of the things that can happen? And we're going to go over some of the ones that can happen anywhere, but really the ones that are dealing more with the office environment than some of the more extreme types of environments that you can have users in. So the most common, and this is a musculoskeletal disorder, MSD. Okay, musculoskeletal disorder. That's easy to think about. That's your muscle systems and your skeletal systems, something happening that is painful, chronic, or acute. What can go wrong? Well, one of the ones, and the most common one, is carpal tunnel syndrome. And it's a pretty basic, it's not life-threatening, it's painful, because you've basically got something called the carpal tunnel, which is right in here in your wrist, and there's a nerve that goes through it. And it's a sheath around a nerve. If the nerve becomes inflamed or the sheath is too small, you get inflammation and you get pain. Over 3 million cases annually of carpal tunnel syndrome. And the reason I bring this one up first is because for computer users, this is one that is very, very common. Having your wrist in a very awkward position, that is the ergonomics, and having some sort of repetitive task that requires the movement of your wrists and arms can cause carpal tunnel. Some people get surgery for it, but most of the time this can be cured by simple redesign of the ergonomic situation and just standard anti-inflammatories that you would use just over the counter, and even ice, your basic type of pretty straightforward to fix. If you are getting carpal tunnel syndrome or you're dealing with carpal tunnel syndrome, changing the ergonomics of your workplace on your computer can often just solve the problem altogether. At some point it may become so bad that you can't, but reality is that it's almost always curable. Tendonitis, and I think everybody that's watching this video has probably had at least some experience with tendonitis. Okay, we know that the muscles attached to the bones through these things called tendons, they can get inflamed, they can have all sorts of microscopic tears, but what comes along with that is pain. It can be caused by two things: overuse or overload. You can get it by doing the same thing over and over again, and eventually you get tendonitis. Or you can just do something that's just too hard. You pick up that weight that's too much, and you cause yourself tendonitis. Usually this is going to go away on its own. If you're not going out and re-injuring it, or you're not reusing that muscle, that tendon over and over again, you can probably get rid of it. But there are extreme cases which do require medical intervention, but for the most part, these are not terribly extreme. They do hurt, and it is a quality of life issue. But by taking care of it with the right, proper, easy-to-do medical treatment, you can usually take care of it. There's a number of different types of tendinitises, like the rotator cuff type of injuries. Rotator cuff, these are areas of your body where you're really prone to getting tendinitis. This is in your shoulder, in the rotation part of your shoulder where the bone comes in. Another one is Epicondylitis, which is, most of you will probably know this as good old tennis elbow. It's not just caused, by the way, by tennis. It can also be caused by golf, because in tennis you've got one type of motion, which is essentially your lateral epicondylitis, or golf, which is your medial, different movements, same section. Okay, very common. It's typically a sports injury. Now, understanding sports injuries, you think, well, what does that have to do with the design of workplace in HCI? Well, people that have sports injuries still use your equipment. If somebody with tennis elbow who's completely incapable of making this motion has to do this motion with your machine, they're not going to be able to do it. So you still have to have an understanding of how these sports-related types of tendonitis are going to affect your workplace. Treatments, standard treatments for tendonitis apply to all the different types of tendinitises that you see here. Another one, which is also quite common, is tendinosynovitis. Okay, is essentially trigger finger. And trigger finger, what will happen is your finger will either get into a position where it's very painful to move it, not to be confused with the arthritis, or it may just simply lock into that position. And what will happen is you will literally try to move it out, and as you do it, you're going to hear a big pop, and it's going to pop back out, and you're going to have a little bit of motion again until you actually have a recurrence. It's inflammation. It's a standard inflammation type of thing. And again, the treatment for any type of inflammation is essentially the same. Rest, but you can, in tendinosynovitis, you can go ahead and you can splint it, but you're going to be using some sort of anti-inflammatory, hopefully to take care of the situation. And then one of the common injuries for many, many people, the lower back injury, and lower back injuries can be both chronic and acute. Poor posture in a desk over a period of times is going to go ahead and weaken the portion of your back that you need to worry about, and it's going to hurt. And it can be just as severe as an acute injury. So you never really just say, hey, we're not going to take this into account. The good news about these types of things is you can easily take care of them. Any type of good workplace design dealing with the ergonomics, the simple ergonomics of being in the right position, can solve these. Now, the MSDs do account for a tremendous number of lost work and medical attention. They are painful. I mean, they're the leading cause of, and the most frequently reported cause of lost work. I just can't do what I need to do today. Okay. The other thing which is also important is not just missing work, but when you're dealing with these types of injuries, they affect your quality of life. They typically they prevent you from doing things that you would like to be able to do. And that is really an important thing, because in the field of ergonomics and human factors, you do want to deal with quality of life issues. So, how do you prevent this? Well, the first thing is very simple. There is a lot of research in ergonomic design, and you simply use the best practices of ergonomic designs. you need to recognize the signs that these injuries are actually occurring. If you know that they're occurring and you know that it is probably due to a non-optimal ergonomic situation, it's not that difficult to figure out how to change that ergonomic situation. The other thing, which is just a nice thing altogether, is if you're doing some sort of activity all day long, no motion, no getting up, well, throw in that frequent break where you get up and you stretch or you move or you get that muscle into a different position. You're essentially locking yourself in if you don't do those types of things. Now, ergonomics is recognized by OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Administration. There is the general clause, or the general duty clause of OSHA covers issues of these types of injuries that we've discussed and the ergonomic design. So it isn't like in a workplace you can ignore this. So companies do have a responsibility because claims can be made against the company underneath the OSHA general duty clause against the company. So the company has to be aware of potential ergonomic issues and make plans to ensure that these types of injuries do not occur. How do you do that? Well, you have to have both a management and a worker support phase because management has to be aware of the fact that this can be an issue and support the ergonomic process, but workers have to be responsible for understanding and recognizing potential injuries also, and actually have to recognize these types of injuries as they're occurring because most of them are ones that don't occur immediately, they occur over a period of time. You have to have a level of training on the ergonomic issues and a reporting mechanism and an evaluation process in place to prevent having liability issues associated with this. So this was a very short lecture. I wanted to get in at least a little bit about the understanding of ergonomics, workplace-related injury as it deals with the types of things that we do with human-computer interaction, and understand what can actually occur and what are your responsibilities under what laws to deal with these types of things. So ergonomics, what can happen, what you need to do. Thank you very much. This is Dr. Ron Eaglin signing out from Daytona State College.